At Christmas dinner, Dad casually dropped the bombshell, "We're finally selling the lake house, and you're not getting a dime." I froze, fork halfway to my mouth, staring at him like he'd lost his mind. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. I'm Tess Harper, 28, and for years I thought I knew my family. Dad, Greg Harper, has always been controlling and distant, and somehow, he always favored my younger brother, Cole. Cole, smug and self-assured, sat there with that irritating smirk, completely expecting me to stay silent. Mom, Elaine, looked quietly sad, like she didn't want to say anything, like she had already given up on trying to protect me. The words hit me like a punch. Humiliation washed over me as everyone at the table waited for my reaction. I felt invisible, like everything I'd worked for or hoped to inherit didn't matter. I left the room and walked into the snowy backyard, trying to stop the tears. Memories of summer nights at the lake house came rushing back, laughing with my brother, Dad pretending to notice me only when it was convenient. I realized this wasn't just about money, it was about a lifetime of being overlooked, underestimated, and dismissed. But anger started to replace the shock. I wasn't going to let them erase me. If Dad thought I'd sit quietly while he handed everything to Cole, he was wrong. I decided right then that I would find a way to claim what was mine. I would gather proof, outsmart them, and make sure they couldn't ignore me anymore. This Christmas, I wouldn't just be hurt, I would fight back. I slammed the door behind me and ran into the cold, biting snow, letting it sting my cheeks while my chest heaved. Betrayal twisted inside me, a sharp, bitter ache I couldn't shake. How could Dad just say that in front of everyone, like I was nothing? Anger and hurt tangled together, leaving me shaking. I closed my eyes and saw it all, my childhood summers at the lake house, the way Dad would laugh at Cole's jokes, praise him for every little thing, while I faded into the background. I remembered staying up late, pretending not to notice him brushing past me, always thinking maybe one day he'd see me, care about me, finally. But tonight proved what I had always suspected. The sting of disappointment turned into a fire I couldn't ignore. I realized I had spent too long letting them decide my worth. I wouldn't stay silent, I wouldn't let Cole or Dad erase me again. I clenched my fists in the snow, feeling the cold bite into my skin, and a fierce determination took over. For the first time I understood that I could take control, that I could fight back, and that I didn't have to rely on anyone else to protect me. Something inside me had shifted. No more waiting. No more hiding. I promised myself then, under the gray winter sky, that I would reclaim what was mine, not with anger alone, but with every ounce of cunning and courage I had. I wouldn't be powerless anymore. I lingered near the hallway, pretending to tie my boot, when I heard Dad's voice carrying through the slightly ajar door. He was laughing, too easily, as he spoke to someone on the phone. "Yeah, everything's set. She'll never suspect a thing. By the time she finds out, it'll be done." My stomach sank. Realtor. Lake house. Underhanded. The words clicked together like pieces of a puzzle I didn't want to see. My heart raced as I realized the truth. Dad never planned for me to inherit a single thing. Every sly grin, every casual dismissal over the years, it had all been part of this. My mind shifted into overdrive. I couldn't let them pull this off. I needed proof, something undeniable, something that would stop them in their tracks. I stepped back quietly, hiding in the shadows, letting him think he was alone. I already began plotting, mentally noting what I needed to collect, which papers to photograph, which conversations to remember. Patience was my ally. Impulses wouldn't help me here, a misstep could ruin everything. I felt a surge of clarity. I had always been underestimated, written off as too cautious or too quiet, but now that careful nature was my greatest weapon. I would move carefully, strike strategically, and ensure that when the time came, there would be no way for Dad or Cole to ignore me. I wasn't just angry anymore, I was ready, calculating every move, preparing to claim what had always been mine. I found Dad alone in his study, leaning back in his chair with that smug look he always wore when he thought he was untouchable. "We need to talk," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. His eyes flicked to me, barely registering my presence. "You don't understand business, Tess," he replied dismissively, waving a hand as if swatting away a bothersome insect. That was it. No explanation, no apology, just the same cold brush-off I'd endured my whole life. A wave of anger mixed with heartbreak crashed over me. Every slight, every comment meant to make me feel small, every moment I'd tried to earn his respect, it had all been manipulation. I'd been invisible, nothing more than a pawn in his carefully controlled world. I turned to leave, the study door closing softly behind me, but the sting lingered. Walking down the hall, I realized how little he had ever truly seen me, how my presence had been tolerated at best. The betrayal wasn't just about money anymore, it was about years of being dismissed, ignored, and undervalued by the person who was supposed to care the most. As I stepped into the quiet of the hallway, a plan began to take shape in my mind. I wouldn't confront him again, not directly. I would act where he least expected it, quietly and deliberately. The pain of being unseen transformed into resolve. I wouldn't beg for recognition. I would earn it, and I would make him, and Cole, realize, when the time came, that I had never been someone to overlook. I drove to the edge of town and stopped at a small, familiar house, the one where Marvin had lived for as long as I could remember. He opened the door, surprised to see me, but a warm smile quickly replaced the initial shock. "Tess? It's been years," he said, stepping aside to let me in. Over coffee, I explained everything, Dad's secret plans, the way Cole had been groomed to take over, the humiliation I had suffered. Marvin listened carefully, nodding, then leaned back in his chair. "Legally, you have more rights than you think," he said. "There are loopholes, and the documents your father is trying to push through aren't airtight. You could challenge this." Hearing that, something inside me shifted. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt a spark of hope. The fire I had been feeding with anger now had a target. Marvin and I went over what I would need, old deeds, correspondences, anything that could prove my stake in the lake house. Step by step, methodically, we started forming a plan. I left his house with a new sense of purpose, my mind buzzing with ideas. I wasn't just reacting anymore, I was strategizing. The thought that I could fight back, that there was a path to reclaim what was mine, lifted the heaviness I had been carrying. For the first time, I believed I could turn the tables and take control of my own story. This wasn't just about revenge, it was about justice, and I finally had someone in my corner who could help me see it through. I went through the drawers and cabinets at the lake house while Dad and Cole were distracted with their own preparations, careful to stay unnoticed. Beneath a stack of old bills, I found folders I hadn't seen before, marked with cryptic labels. My eyes widened as I flipped through them, agreements showing Dad had quietly sold parcels of land around the property, cleverly hiding clauses that would prevent me from claiming anything. My hand shook as I pulled out my phone and snapped photos, making digital copies in case the originals disappeared. Every paper I uncovered added to the picture of their scheme, the depth of deceit making my blood boil. They had tried to erase me, to make it impossible for me to fight back, and yet here was proof they hadn't anticipated I would find. Time pressed against me like a vice. If Cole and Dad finalized the transactions before I moved, everything I stood for, every chance to reclaim my share, would vanish. Fear and anger collided in my chest, twisting into determination. This wasn't just about money anymore, it was about standing up against the people who had spent my life undervaluing me. I carefully organized what I had gathered, double-checking each document and photo, making sure nothing could be challenged or dismissed. The stakes felt enormous, almost suffocating, but I couldn't back down. This was my chance to prove I wasn't powerless, to turn the tables, and to make sure they couldn't erase me. The weight of their betrayal made the mission personal, and for the first time, I felt a sharp edge of readiness cut through the fear. I cornered Cole in the garage while he was loading boxes, forcing myself to stay calm despite the racing in my chest. "We need to talk," I said, keeping my voice steady. His smirk spread across his face immediately, like I was some joke he didn't need to take seriously. "You're serious?" he laughed, leaning against the wall. "You really think you can do anything about this?" His tone was dripping with amusement, completely underestimating me. I let him talk, pretending to hesitate, while subtly pressing record on my phone in my pocket. Every careless word he said about Dad's plan, every tiny detail of how he intended to benefit, came through clearly, capturing his arrogance and complicity. The smug grin on his face was all the proof I needed. He didn't even realize he was giving me ammunition. As I listened silently, my anger morphed into a sharp, focused energy. This was the moment I began turning the tables. The brother who had always seemed untouchable suddenly had vulnerabilities I could exploit. Every word he carelessly offered fed my growing confidence. By the time I left, I felt a thrill I hadn't experienced in years, a sense of control and strategy. For the first time, I wasn't reacting to their schemes, I was preparing to strike with precision. Cole's arrogance had become my advantage, and the knowledge that I now held undeniable proof lit a fire inside me. This confrontation wasn't just a conversation, it was the first real step toward reclaiming everything they thought they could take without consequence. I waited until the house was quiet before sending everything I had gathered to the family lawyer and the estate attorney. I didn't add explanations or accusations, just the documents, the recordings, and the dates. Let the evidence speak for itself. I made sure none of it could be traced back to me immediately, slipping it through secure channels that would land directly in their hands without Dad catching wind. The next morning, the shift began. I watched from the hallway as Dad answered a call, his voice rising in sharp, irritated bursts. Papers rustled, drawers opened and slammed, and his calm facade cracked. Cole paced behind him, whispering frantically, both of them clearly thrown off balance. Their perfect plan was suddenly wobbling, and they didn't know where the leak had come from. I stayed out of sight, listening to the confusion build. The attorney's questions must have hit the right nerves, because Dad's tone went from defensive to strained. Cole kept insisting it would work out, but even he sounded unsure. For the first time, they weren't the ones in control. A slow, steady satisfaction warmed me. They had spent years deciding everything for me, speaking over me, planning around me like I was irrelevant. Now they were scrambling, trying to patch holes they didn't know how to fix. And the best part was that I hadn't raised my voice or made a scene. I had simply used what they tried to hide. It was the first taste of real power I'd ever had in this family. Watching their confidence shake, knowing I had caused it without them suspecting me, filled me with a calm, steady strength. This was only the beginning, and for once, I wasn't the one being pushed aside, I was the one moving the pieces. Dad cornered me in the living room later that evening, his voice low but sharp. "You're breaking up the family at Christmas, Tess. Can't you just let it go?" He reached out as if to pull me back into submission, expecting tears, apologies, anything to prove I was still under his control. But I didn't flinch. I felt a quiet strength settle inside me, a clarity I hadn't known I could reach. His words bounced off me, meaningless now, like he was trying to trap a shadow. I understood then that I no longer needed his approval, his validation, or his manipulation to feel powerful. I looked at Cole from across the room, letting a faint, knowing smile play on my lips. He stiffened immediately, sensing I had noticed more than he had intended. The same smug confidence he always wore faltered for just a moment, and I let that settle in. I didn't have to confront him outright, the hint was enough to make him uneasy. The familiar sting of frustration he tried to provoke in me vanished. Instead, I felt exhilaration. Every plan, every carefully gathered piece of proof, every small move I had made was falling into place. I wasn't crying. I wasn't pleading. I was calculating, letting them see that the rules had changed. For the first time, I realized that my emotional armor was unbreakable. Dad's guilt trips and Cole's arrogance could no longer reach me. The power had shifted quietly but undeniably, and I was already planning my next move, calm, patient, and completely in control. I spent the next morning at Marvin's office, going over the final details before submitting the paperwork. The temporary injunction was ready, a formal barrier to stop Dad from selling the lake house before my claim could be properly reviewed. Every signature, every clause, was precise, leaving no room for his usual tricks. Marvin leaned back and gave me a warning I didn't need. Your father won't take this lying down. Expect resistance. He'll push, argue, try to intimidate you. I listened carefully, but instead of fear, a surge of determination coursed through me. I had waited too long for this moment. I wasn't backing down now. Returning home felt different. The house, which had always seemed suffocating, now felt tense, electric, like a battlefield ready for strategy. Every glance from Dad and every whispered word from Cole carried a new weight. I could see the unease in their expressions, subtle but unmistakable. For the first time in years, I felt fully in control of something that had always been denied to me. This wasn't just a legal move, it was a declaration. I had set the terms, and now they had to respond on my timeline, not theirs. The fear that had followed me through my childhood and adulthood faded, replaced by a sharp, focused clarity. I realized I was no longer powerless. Every calculated step, every piece of evidence, every quiet plan was finally paying off. For the first time, I walked through the house feeling strong, capable, and untouchable, knowing that the events of this Christmas would no longer define me, they would define my victory. I called a family meeting under the pretense of discussing the lake house, making sure Dad and Mom were both present. When Cole arrived, I let him start bragging about how smoothly everything was going, his usual arrogance filling the room. Then I laid it out. Step by step, I presented the evidence of his secret plan to sell portions of the property for personal gain, the recordings, the documents, everything. His smug confidence faltered as I walked them through his own words and actions, leaving no room for excuses. Dad's expression tightened, his usual calm mask cracking just enough for me to notice, while Mom looked between us, shocked. Cole turned pale, his mouth opening and closing as he tried to defend himself, but the proof was undeniable. He had been caught red-handed, and the weight of exposure settled heavily on his shoulders. I watched him shrink in front of both parents, the arrogance gone, replaced by humiliation and disbelief. The satisfaction coursing through me was sharp and exhilarating. For the first time, Dad's smugness wasn't unshakable, it flickered as he looked at Cole, clearly frustrated and unsettled. In that moment, I felt a profound shift. The power I had quietly been building over weeks had finally manifested, and I could see it reflected in their faces. Recognition, however subtle, began to find its way toward me. Cole's betrayal had been exposed, and for the first time, I wasn't just surviving the family's schemes, I was actively dismantling them, one undeniable truth at a time. I sat across from Dad and Marvin in the lawyer's office, the air thick with tension and quiet calculation. I laid out my terms clearly: partial control of the lake house, with defined rights and responsibilities. Every clause was precise, leaving no room for dispute, and I could see Dad bristle with each point I calmly presented. He hesitated, then, under the lawyer's guidance, had to acknowledge my claim publicly. Hearing him say it aloud, admitting my rightful share, was a small but powerful victory. There was no drama, no shouting, just the quiet satisfaction of having forced recognition where there had been dismissal for so long. I left the office with a steady pulse of triumph running through me. This was revenge in its most effective form, clever, strategic, and clean. I hadn't needed to humiliate anyone unnecessarily, I had relied on patience, intelligence, and evidence. The lake house, once a symbol of exclusion and favoritism, now represented something entirely different: my dignity, my voice, my triumph over years of manipulation. Standing on the dock later, looking out over the water, I let the quiet settle around me. The weight of betrayal had not disappeared, but it had been transformed into empowerment. Respect, acknowledgement, and a sense of justice now filled the spaces that had once been heavy with anger and hurt. I realized, in that moment, that I had reclaimed not just a piece of property, but my place in the family and my own sense of worth. The lake house was mine in more ways than one, and finally, I felt whole. The days after the injunction felt strange, almost quiet, as Dad and Cole moved through the house with heavy steps, their frustration barely contained. They muttered under their breath, exchanged tense glances, but I didn't react. I kept my distance, letting them stew in their own anger while I remained calm, collected, and entirely unaffected. One afternoon, Mom pulled me aside, her eyes red and voice trembling. "Tess. I'm sorry," she whispered, clutching my hand. "I should have seen what was happening all along. You've always been stronger than we gave you credit for." Her confession carried the weight of years of unspoken truths, and I felt a rush of understanding and bittersweet relief. Watching my family struggle with the consequences of their choices, I reflected on everything I had endured. The betrayal, the dismissals, the favoritism, it had all shaped me, carving resilience into my very being. And yet, taking control, executing my plan, and reclaiming what was rightfully mine had transformed that pain into power. For the first time, I recognized the full scope of what I had gained. The anger that once threatened to consume me had been refined into strategy and courage. I realized that while their betrayal had marked the past, my revenge had rewritten my present. I no longer needed their approval, their recognition, or even their love to feel whole. I had proven to myself, and to them, that I was unshakable. Sitting alone in the quiet of the house, I felt a calm satisfaction. The storm had passed, and I had emerged stronger, smarter, and more certain of my own worth than ever before. The door creaked as I stepped into the lake house, empty and silent except for the faint echo of the water lapping at the shore. I walked slowly to the dock, letting the chill of the autumn air wrap around me, and settled onto the edge, legs dangling over the boards. The sky was streaked with gray, the wind carrying the scent of pine and cold water, and for a moment, I let myself simply breathe. I thought about everything that had led me here, the betrayals, the schemes, the long years of being overlooked. I realized that in losing the family I thought I could count on, I had gained something far more important: clarity, strength, and the understanding that my own worth didn't depend on anyone else. I had been underestimated for so long, but in standing my ground, I had found myself. A quiet satisfaction settled in my chest. The lake house, once a source of pain and frustration, now felt like a symbol of everything I had earned: control, respect, and dignity. The past shadows lingered, but they no longer dictated my steps. I had proven to myself that I could face any challenge, outmaneuver deception, and emerge stronger. I glanced at the water, the reflection of the sky shimmering in gentle waves, and allowed a small smile to form. Life ahead was uncertain, but I no longer feared it. I was independent, capable, and unafraid to fight for what mattered. This moment was both an ending and a beginning, bittersweet yet full of promise, and I knew that whatever came next, I would face it on my own terms, confident, unshaken, and entirely myself.